There are some great musicians that came out of Washington, D.C., like Marvin Gaye, Johnny Gill, Genuine, Peaches and Herb, Chuck Brown, Duke Ellington, Stacy Lattisaw, and many more. But how many of y'all have heard of the name Billy Stewart? Billy Stewart, he was the one that taught Marvin Gaye how to sing. Wow. Now, before I say Billy Stewart was an underrated singer, Elton John stated that Billy Stewart is his favorite singer and the most underrated R&B singer. That's what Elton John said. Elton John had put in his book that his favorite singer was Billy Stewart, an absolutely enormous guy from Washington, D.C., signed to Chess Records. He said he was an amazing singer who had turned his weight problems into kind of a gimmick. Even Bob Dylan admired Billy Stewart's music and often played it on his radio show. His music was popular among Latino, specifically Chicano, youth on the West Coast. His singing style was very unique. Nobody could really do his style because he would make his words stutter on purpose and ad-lib his vocal runs with double words. And he would sing over calypso Caribbean style music. And when he would perform, he would drive the audience crazy. They gave him the nickname Fat Boy because of his weight. But sadly, he wouldn't live long and his life would end with tragedy. So, let's get into his story, right? Now, Billy Stewart was born on March 24th, 1937 in Washington, D.C. And he comes from a musical family. A lot of his family members could sing and play instruments. His mother, Emma Stewart, taught him how to play the piano when he was 8 years old. They all came from a church background. And, Billy began singing with his brothers at the age of 12 years old because his mother was also in a gospel group called the Stewart Gospel Singers. Now, Billy and his brothers Johnny and James Stewart and his cousin Norman Smith also had a gospel group called the Four Stewart Brothers. And the crazy part is they had their own radio show at WUST Radio in Washington, D.C. They sang on that radio show every week for 5 years. Wow. They were singing everywhere in D.C. at that time. But he also listened to secular music. He was a big fan of Ella Fitzgerald. He loved the way Ella Fitzgerald used to scat sing. She's known for that scat singing. Now, by the time he became a teenager and entered high school, he started winning local singing competitions. He won one of the talent shows singing the song called Summertime by George Gershwin for the 1935 black opera titled Porgy and Bess. Now, another famous singer he used to compete with at that time was Herb Fame from the R&B duo group called Peaches and Herb. They all grew up in Washington, D.C. together. Now, also around that time, legendary guitarist Bo Diddley of Chess Records had moved to Washington, D.C. And he had put a studio in his basement of his house, right? And all the young talent in D.C. at that time used to record there. One group in particular was a group called the Marquis, which featured a young Marvin Gaye, y'all. Marvin Gaye was doing doo-wop music at the time, but Billy used to record at Bo Diddley's house too when Marvin Gaye was there. And Billy and Marvin Gaye also used to sing together in a group called the Rainbows. And according to some of Billy Stewart's band members, they said Billy told them that he taught Marvin Gaye how to sing. Wow, that's crazy. He taught one of the greatest singers of all time how to sing. Unbelievable. Songwriter / artist Don Convey was also in that group. If you don't know who he is, he later on wrote the #1 song called Pony Time for Chubby Checker, and he wrote Chain of Fools for Aretha Franklin, which hit #1 and won a Grammy. But anyway, now see, Bo Diddley loved Billy Stewart's style of singing and the way he played the piano, and he had offered him a job to play in his band. So once he went to Chicago with Bo Diddley, they started to get popular in the clubs and bars. Chess Records was running the music industry at that time. They had Muddy Waters was on Chess Records, Little Walter, Etta James, Howlin' Wolf, Chuck Berry, and many more. And, that's when Leonard Chess decided to give Billy his own record deal and sign him to Chess Records as a solo artist. So once he got signed to Chess Records, the single he released was called Billy's Blues. And, the people, they loved it around Chicago, but the song really didn't make any noise on the charts worldwide. So that's when he decided. Billy left Chess Records and went back home to DC, and he ended up signing with a record company called Okea. And he did release 2 singles. One was called Billy's Heartache, and the other song was called Baby You're My Only Love, which featured Marvin Gaye and his band, the Marquis, singing background. He had another song out called Strange Feeling too. But those singles didn't really make any noise on the charts, and that's when he just stopped making music for a few years. But then he started missing being on stage and performing. And in 1962, he went back to Chess Records. And the first song he released was called Reap What You Sow, which hit number 18 on the Billboard R&B charts. Now, on the B side of that single, he had a song called Fat Boy. People used to clown him for being fat. That was a nickname or something they gave him. But people used to clown him for being fat. Billy was a big guy. And, he struggled with his weight, and he had some health issues. He had diabetes. Now, in 1965, he released his debut album titled I Do Love You. And the single titled I Do Love You hit number 6 on the US R&B chart and number 26 on the Billboard Hot 100. I love that song right there, y'all. I Do Love You. That's my junk right there. Even though, I grew up on the R&B group GQ cover version of I Do Love You, because Quiet Storm used to play that all the time. But I Do Love You, man. I remember they played that song in the movie Baby Boy when Tyrese and Melvin, they had got cool at the end, if y'all remember the movie. And Tyrese started playing it in the car. He was like, this is grown folks music and all this stuff. But I love that song right there. I Do Love You. That's a classic. Now, the next single he released from that album was called Sitting in the Park, which hit number 4 on the Soul chart and number 24 on the Billboard Hot 100. And that was another song I loved too. The R&B group GQ also remade and did a cover version of that song too. And I remember this song called Sitting in the Park by this rapper named High C. He sampled it too. I used to watch that video on MTV all the time. But that was another great song by Billy Stewart, Sitting in the Park. Now, after those songs and that album was successful, Billy went on tour. He performed at the Apollo, and he was on the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars tour with Bobby V, Little Anthony, Brenda Holloway, and the Ikettes, and many more. Now, the following year, in 1966, he released his second album titled Unbelievable. And the first single from that album was called Summertime, and which was a song he used to sing at talent shows when he was in his teens back in DC. But that song Summertime hit number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 7 on the R&B chart, number 39 in the UK, and number 13 in Canada. Maurice White from Earth, Wind & Fire actually played drums on that version. Maurice White he was a session drummer for Chess Records. He played the drums on a lot of their hit songs back in them days. But anyway, so the song Summertime was a big hit for Billy and crossed him over to the pop charts. And that's a great song right there too. You can see a video, it's on YouTube, of him performing that song on the Dick Clark show. But some controversy did come with that song though, because Billy thought he would get some publishing off of the song for writer's credit, because he did He did add some new words, he did some ad libs and put his style to the record. But see, George Gershwin, who composed the song back in 1934 for the black opera Porgy and Bess, he was dead. So look, here's the crazy part. So when Billy confronted Leonard Chess about the publishing money, right? Billy kept nagging him about the writing, publishing. Leonard Chess got fed up that Billy kept asking him about the publishing. So Leonard Chess gave Billy the address to George Gershwin and told Billy to ask him. Now, what's crazy is this. Billy actually followed the address that Leonard Chess gave him, which led him to travel all the way to Queens, New York. And when he got there, it was the gravesite of George Gershwin. Wow. And Leonard Chess had Billy thinking that George Gershwin was alive so he can ask him about the publishing. Come to find out, the man was dead. He made Billy drive all the way to New York, y'all. That's crazy. They say Billy was furious too. I remember this story because Etta James had spoken about it in her book too. She said Billy and Leonard Chess had got into it over publishing, and he told Billy that some guy in New York owned his publishing and gave Billy his address to go see him. And when Billy went to the address in New York, it was a gravesite. The man was dead. Wow. That's crazy. Hey, a lot of people that knew Billy, a lot of close friends that knew Billy said Billy was no joke. Story goes when Leonard Chess was playing with his money about the royalties and publishing, they said Billy pulled out his gun and started shooting down the stairs or something. Another story, Billy ain't no joke, right? R&B legendary singer Johnny Taylor, he told a story about the time that Billy Stewart and Wilson Pickett had gotten a shootout. They started shooting at each other over on the bus over a dispute from a dice game. Wow. He said they were shooting at each other on the bus, but nobody got hurt, thank God. Now, in 1967, Billy released his third album titled Billy Stewart Teaches Old Standards New Tricks. And the single called Secret Love, which is a remake #1 hit song from actress-singer Doris Day, that ended up hitting number 11 on the R&B soul charts for Billy. And that same year he went on tour over in the UK. He went overseas to do a show, right? One of them shows he did over in the UK, he ended up fighting some people in the crowd because they was making fun of his weight. Billy was a wild boy. He didn't play. Now also while he was over in the UK, he had done a show with a band called Bluesology. And in that band, he had met a young Elton John. Wow. Like I said earlier, Elton John was inspired by Billy's music. In 1968, he released the album titled Cross My Heart, and the single called Cross My Heart hit number 34 on the Billboard R&B charts. I love that song right there too. I thought that was a nice song. I remember Jay-Z's producer named Just Blaze, he had sampled it for rapper Jay Electronica's song called Exhibit C, which is a dope song too. I still play to this day. But also that same year, 1968, he had to deal with some tragedy after some of his band members ended up being burnt to death in a car after it overturned and exploded. Out of the 5 members, only 2 survived that crash. And that really shook Billy up during that time. Then, the following year, in 1969, Billy was injured. Billy had got injured in a motorcycle accident, and he started having more health issues from his diabetes due to his weight, which was way over 300 pounds. But then, on January 17th, 1970, Billy Stewart died in a car accident in North Carolina. Now, the story goes, Billy was scheduled to do a show in Columbia, South Carolina. It was him and 3 of his band members riding in his brand new Ford Thunderbird that he had just bought 12 days earlier. And it was 2 other band members. They were in the car. They was in the car following behind him. And they had just performed the previous evening. They finished at 2 a.m. in the morning. and they returned to their hotels around 2:30 or 2:45 a.m. So then around 7:30 a.m., they got up, they woke up, they left about 8 o'clock a.m., heading to the next show. Now, reports say that Billy was on the Interstate 95 in North Carolina, and he may have lost control of his car. And he hit an embankment on a bridge, and they ended up going right into the river. Now, another report said the wheels on his car may have locked up and caused the accident. It was all types of reports, because reports were stating that while they was approaching a bridge across the Nueces River, Billy's car left the highway, ran along a median strip at a slight angle to the highway, struck the bridge curbing, and plunged into the river. And everybody in the car died from drowning because they were trapped in the car. It was Billy Stewart, Norman P. Rich of Washington, D.C., William Cathy of Charlotte, North Carolina, and Rico Hightower of Newark, New Jersey. Man, sad, man. Plus, it was freezing cold, and it was wintertime, y'all. Wow. Now, his manager, who was in the other car following behind him, said that morning, Billy's car wheels were wobbling when he left Rocky Mount, North Carolina, early in the morning. And, Billy Stewart told him that he would have the wheels checked when he get to Columbia, South Carolina. But, his manager also said, as they approached the bridge, the sudden locking and the slope of the bridge threw his car into the air, striking a pole that was supporting the bridge, and his car almost split in two pieces and plunged into the Nueces River, submerging immediately. Benny Deere, who was the drummer in Billy Stewart's band, he was riding in the van which was following behind Billy's Thunderbird. He said that he saw Billy's Thunderbird moving from right lane of the highway to the left lane to pass another car. And he could see Billy wrestling with the steering wheel. And it's crazy because, Billy's family said they had saw him a few days before with his new Ford Thunderbird, and the brakes were not working properly. And he almost ran into the building where everybody was at. And that's when his family members had told him to take that car back to the dealership or get it fixed. Now, the people in Smithfield, North Carolina were shocked because, that was a small town, and nothing really never happens around that town. Hundreds of people were at the scene, and they were really shocked when they found out that it was Billy Stewart. Now, witnesses at the scene stated that for some reason, it took almost 2 to 3 hours to get the car and the bodies out because the river was not deep at all. They said the river wasn't deep at all. And, some felt that they could have rescued them faster with much more effort. They might would have lived. And, at Billy's funeral, they played the song, I Do Love You. Now, after his death, his wife filed a lawsuit against Ford Motor Company, alleging that the accident was caused by a defect in the steering mechanism or brake construction. The case went through 4 trials, and Ford Motors, they won the first trial. Ford Motors won the first trial, but after Billy's wife appealed it, and the court ruled that the trial court erred in not giving the requested jury instructions, the case was reversed and remanded and then settled out of court. And in 1979, Ford Motor Company paid a $500,000 settlement to the families. In 2002, Billy was inducted into the Washington Area Music Association Hall of Fame. In 2003, his version of the song Summertime was also featured in the last scene and on the soundtrack of the movie titled Stuck on You. In 2021, he was inducted into the National Rhythm and Blues Hall of Fame. And there's a documentary out called Fat Boy, the Billy Stewart story, which was done by Beverly Lindsay Johnson for the PBS station. You know, Beverly Lindsay Johnson, she said she was 12 years old, living in the Bronx when she first heard a song called I Do Love You by Billy Stewart. She loved that song. She said it was 1965 and her radio was always on the R&B station. And she fell in love with it, and she fell in love with Billy Stewart and his music. Man, yo, Billy Stewart was young, y'all. He was so young when he died. Just getting started, too. If he would have lived, man, he would have been something big, too. He was only 32 years old. 32 years old. Rest in peace, Billy Stewart.